Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the hashtag Love Her podcast. I'm Julie Cole, your host, and I'm here with my sweet friend, Casey. Casey, you want to introduce yourself really quick? What do you want people to know about you?
I am a local therapist. I'm really passionate about working with people with a trauma history. Really passionate about talking about recovery from trauma and how it's not just one size fits all, but that everybody has their own path. And so, yeah, just really passionate about that.
Dude, we could go into that.
Yeah, we could.
So, Casey and I have known each other for right at 10 years.
Yeah.
Actually, right at 11 years.
Oh,
Because I was
yeah,
pregnant with
with
Julia,
Julia.
and
Hmm.
Julia's getting ready to turn 11.
Yep,
Yeah.
it's crazy.
Do we want to tell that story?
I was told to go to a meeting one night, and I walked in, and these two women like just came up to me, and one of them was this very, very pregnant woman who was like, "Hey," and that's how I met Julie, and then
Yeah.
we were good friends because we got each other.
That's so funny. I put you in a car and hijacked you for that weekend.
Mm-hmm.
So come
Yep.
with me. I'm gonna run some errands. I was hosting Jamie and Laura's wedding shower,
Mm.
and we went all over town that day.
And I learned that Julie knows somebody, at least one person in every store that you will ever go to with her, and parking lot. Mhm.
And then the person you were actually crashing with at the time,
Yes, my roommate. You dropped me back off with my roommate at the time was somebody that you knew her
high
from
school.
high school. Yeah, so
Yep.
it's a
Yep.
small
Her brother
deal.
graduated with me, and her dad was my basketball coach.
Yeah.
And I had to laugh because I didn't make the connection. She's like, Julie's son. I was like, oh, hey, yeah, yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
So
That's so funny.
that was my full introduction to Julie Cole.
Oh man, it's been a wild ride since.
Yep. So then we
Right.
worked at Deotis together, doing lots of grant stuff. You were doing your peer support stuff.
Hmm. We were both being traumatized by the system.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
It's just
You
systems work. It's traumatizing.
Yeah,
I
if you
know.
don't want your PTSD symptoms to get worse, I wouldn't work for state government.
Especially in cubicles.
Email.
In a building, you can't control the lights, the noise, the air, the heat, or whether you're the one who gets the suicide call.
Oh yeah, that was not fun.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, we used to answer the phones and the calls that were crisis calls, they would all just send them straight to Julie.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I would always get those because I was the licensed, I also was the licensed clinician on staff.
yep.
And I had resigned. I'd actually already put in my resignation, and everybody was having a huge, like, all staff meeting. And there was one person answering the phones, and then I was in my cubicle trying to get some stuff done to wrap up to transition out. And that sweet little woman says, Julie, I'm gonna transfer a call to you. I got a guy who says that he's thinking about killing himself. And I said, okay,
Mm-hmm.
right. And
Mm-hmm.
then I get on the call, and he was a sweet little man, and he thought he was calling the suicide hotline, and he called Deotis. Hmm. And I said, did some of my standard questions, like, where are you? Trying to get some idea of his location if I needed to call emergency services. And yeah, I asked him, I said, if you were to do something to, do you have a plan to kill yourself? He's like, yeah, I'm sitting with a loaded 38 in my lap right now. I was like, and I've got this poor little woman who's over here, and I can't
Yep.
stop. So I don't know if you remember, you were actually walking through to grab something from your office or your cubicle for the meeting, and I was
Yeah.
literally snapping my finger at the top of my cubicle trying to get somebody's attention because we didn't actually have a protocol for that kind of a thing at Deotis because it was a state
Yep.
agency.
Yeah.
And I wrote a note to you, and then you called 911, and you had to keep coming back and writing notes because 911 was asking a million questions. I'm
Yeah.
like, but I was
Yeah.
able to get for his daughter, who was an adult, was there, and I got her on the phone, and she endorsed that he had been suicidal and that she was concerned for his safety, that she had not seen a gun, but he had been in the backyard. And anyway, it was this big mess. Yeah. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that was one of my more intense calls that I've had. Yeah.
Yeah, that one was a little bit of a nail biter for sure.
And because it literally took us 20 minutes for emergency services to ask all the questions that they had. And I understand, like, I tell them I've got a guy with a loaded gun. They want to make sure they're safe going in and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Then we were both at the Courage Center.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yep.
left, and then I needed an
Yep.
internship
Yep.
for master's. So we were over at the Courage Center together
With Abby.
with Abby. Yes, we had a lot of fun.
Oh my
Do-
gosh, we laughed so hard. I have so
Yeah.
many videos of us laughing and just being stupid. One of the cool parts about that job was that I had always had a philosophy as a manager or as a leader that to try to meet people with their strengths, and that was a place I was able to do
Mhm.
that and really navigate that. And I really like that gave me a lot of confidence, and yeah, I really actually can do this thing I believe in. Because as
Mhm.
the director, I was literally it was a staff of interns. I had interns and I had one paid and that was still a paid internship for the person who was doing my social media content and stuff for me. So we were all just like running around like chickens with our head cut off, working our butts off.
Yeah.
Y'all
Yeah,
got
and I
some
would,
active internship hours.
yeah, girl, you did. And I would also have to say that as somebody who is, I'm very clearly neurodivergent,
Mhm.
spicy, it can be very difficult for people to work with me because they
Yeah.
don't understand like why I'm doing certain things. And I also have a hard time with certain types of authority.
Hmm.
And so being able to be in that position with you allowed me to really kind of just be who I am. And you were able, you understood what was going on when other people
Hmm.
didn't. And so you were able to create an environment where like I could be successful and I could be okay
Hmm.
with, less challenge, I guess, and less
Sure.
misunderstanding from the people. Cause you watched that happen previously at Deotis and
Hmm.
you went to bat for me quite a few times at
Yeah.
Deotis,
Yeah,
you know.
absolutely.
Um,
Well, and it was a reflection of me also being neurospicy and just knowing that that's what I had needed was somebody
oh,
just to really cultivate my strengths and stop micromanaging and
mhm,
getting clear about the non-negotiables and then
mhm,
not micromanaging the stuff that didn't matter.
mhm,
I can even
yeah,
remember I was giving you a lot of space to do the work from home. You were just
mhm,
being accountable with your time. I remember somebody saying, why are you letting Casey work at home a lot? And I'm like, because that's where Casey works better. And as long as Casey's keeping up with their targets for their work, then there's no issue. And they said, well, why can't I work from home? I was like, because you can't keep up with your targets. Oh, and I was able to say, like, that's not the most beneficial environment for you. And they were able to go, okay, I'm going to
yeah.
try to do what I can to support people in the ways that bring out the best of their skills.
Mhm. Yeah, instead of doing just kind of across the board, this is the thing. And looking back, I can see now that a lot of that need to like not be in the environment had to do with being overstimulated. Too much sensory input. And
Yes.
so looking back now, I'm like, oh, well, that makes so much sense as to
Mm-hmm.
why I did work much better at a coffee shop or where I put my headphones on or like at home where there's just less going on, then I can actually focus. But from the outside, from more of a traditional point of view, it can look like I'm trying to not do the work, I'm trying to not be accountable,
Yeah.
and those kinds of things. And so
Yep.
looking back now, I can see kind of both sides of it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, definitely, well, it's not the easiest thing to try to
Well,
navigate.
right. Well, it's something that was such a struggle for us both at Deotis, especially like we were way more productive when we were in our offices over at Morris Village in the old cottage where
Mhm.
we had some insulation from all the stimulation. And they bring everybody into this big office where we're all in cubicles and we can't control the noise. And I would do all these things to try to control the environment from putting up literally a tape across my cubicle entrance saying, please do not disturb while I'm trying to work on stuff. And how many people would come in and touch me on the back
Yep.
or come over the top of the cubicle or
Yep.
call my phone over and over again. Couldn't time block.
Yeah.
And that's the part where I say systems work is hard, especially for folks who get easily overstimulated, is there's a lot of elements you can't control. And it was exhausting me
Mhm.
every day. And I'm so just exhausted all the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's that bureaucracy piece.
Yeah.
I remember we had been in our own building, right? It was me, you, and one other person, and we were in our own building, separate from the main building.
And all of
And
us very neurospicy and easily overstimulated.
all three of us very similar. And we all had offices with doors, and like we could really manage that input. But then they moved us all into the same floor in cubicles with halogen lights. You couldn't control, again, any of that noise. And when I asked for an accommodation for my PTSD symptoms, they weren't happy about it. All I wanted was like some kind of door or some kind of, just even a cloth up, just so that I had more notice when somebody was coming in. I wasn't startled because there was no way for me to be in that cubicle with my back not to the opening.
Yeah.
So according to the ADA, like they have to respond, they have to accommodate, but they get to decide what the accommodations are. And so their accommodation was to give me noise canceling headphones, which kind of does the exact opposite of what I was trying to get at.
Can't monitor if anybody's coming in. That's what would happen if I turned up music.
Yeah, so I would have the headphones on and still I mean, it definitely, I will say, the headphones did help. I learned through that turning the noise off really helped my body calm down, but that definitely didn't help with the startle response.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I've known about myself for a long time and something I've had to compensate for in every office I'm in is that I have to be cautious because I don't want to share too much, too many detailed pieces. But let's just say once upon a time in my life, there were multiple people that I was having to monitor for, right? And so in my home growing up, I would listen, I would always listen to the noise because it would tell me who was around, who was coming my way, what was happening, and I could guard myself in different ways for different people. And so when I hear noise in the environment, I can't ignore it. And when I hear people talking in the environment, I can't ignore it. And it's not just the ADHD squirrel. It's literally this hypervigilant response that at some point I've had to learn that I'm not going to shame that out of myself. Like my job is to own that that's a need.
Yep.
Right? It's a need. And even in offices that I've been in, one of the things we had to work on when I was like in Cole Wellness with JP was the gym noise. There's some people who can totally ignore that. And actually, the gym noise itself wasn't bad. And you hearing people moving the barbells and hitting the steel and that kind of stuff wasn't bad. But when people would start talking, that would be the thing, because I never know what's actually happening. Is there something going on? Is there something dangerous happening? And that's where my brain goes. And I can work on soothing that. But at the same time, I cannot attend to the person I'm in session with, cannot attend to the moment. And the work we do requires complete attunement.
Yeah.
Even before I got into the deeper somatic work, I've always been somebody who had to attune. I have a very deep intuitive sense about people and what their needs in the moment.
Yeah.
Which I also think segues into some of the things we are talking about, which is how do we hold compassionate witness for people?
Yeah.
And that's true whether we're doing it in therapy, counseling or coaching, or whether we're doing it with our friendships and our loved ones.
Yeah, I gotta say that attunement piece it's so important. It's also one of the things I think that as somebody who is neurodivergent, being attuned to and feeling seen in that way was not a common experience that I had up until ish plus years ago. There were some before that, but living in a world that is not neurodivergent makes you feel chronically misunderstood and chronically wrong for all the things,
Too
right?
much.
You can't fit into the square hole. You just can't do it, no matter how hard you try. And I think what both of us have kind of experienced over the more recent past is kind of coming into our own and understanding these pieces and parts of us that, like, it's not something we have to get rid of. It's not, oh, I'm ADHD or I'm autistic or whatever that is, and therefore, like, I have this label now. No, it's more of like, oh, that's what that is. And I don't have to try to get rid of it. I can accept it and I can try to work with it instead of constantly trying to fight against it.
Absolutely.
is exhausting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, or trying to creating resistance by trying to change it,
Yes.
which is a neurotypical perspective. The
Mm-hmm.
neurotypical perspective is if I have this problem, I just educate myself about it and I do something different, right? And actually, when I'm working with clients who are neurodivergent, and even with my own neurodivergent child, trying to navigate the way the world thinks that if they just educate them about themselves, it'll resolve the thing that everybody else is uncomfortable about.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the piece too for me is I've always just had to deal with everybody else's discomfort with my stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
instead of just owning myself, I would try to change pieces and parts of that. It's like the fucking giving tree,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
cutting off every part of me until there's nothing left.
Mm-hmm.
And I just can't do that. Like, that's not actually, that's counter to me sitting into my gifts, which is what I'm actually here to give.
Yeah.
And so the more I sit in my wildness, I call it my
Mm-hmm.
big sparkly energy, like I don't see it as too much now. It's just this big sparkly energy, but it is a struggle because it doesn't fit in a lot of places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A lot, a lot of people want to benefit from it, but they don't want to be tuned to it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like people don't like it when I'm really direct.
Yeah.
They seem to get really offended by the way that I say things. And I'm just like, I don't understand. I just don't like the thing, or I don't feel like doing that, or whatever it
Yeah.
is. And
Mm-hmm.
people take it personally when really I just don't like the thing, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I think, okay, so fighting our true nature and fighting
Mm-hmm.
that creates a lot of burnout. And it really reminds me of when you finally left the Courage Center. You were in a place where you were so burned out. You
I couldn't
finally
function.
no, it was bad. And
Mm-hmm.
you left and went into almost like this cocoon season of like trying to rebuild because
Yeah.
you were fighting all this stuff, but then also trying to fight it down and fit this mold. And then things with nonprofit agencies can be challenging and really
Yeah.
challenging to who we are.
Yeah. And there's a part where like, if I can see what we're trying to build, I will not compensate for your ego because that's not what we're here for. I'm not here to massage your ego. I'm here to do the work. And there were so many elements where I was expected to massage people's egos. And there's a difference between being a director and understanding the give and take of owner relationships, partnership. I do that stuff well.
Oh, yeah.
The bigger part is the expectation of bringing me in for my expertise and then fighting me the whole way about my expertise. It's like, wait a minute, you asked me to come in and do this. And then there's this part where I'm supposed to like then become a puppet. No.
Yeah.
And there's this part with every job that I ever work, which is if I get to a place where I feel like I can't effectively do the work that I'm there to do or serve the
Mhm.
people I'm there to serve, it's my time to leave. And
Yeah.
generally, when I leave, I try to structure it in a way that will address whatever the issue is.
Mhm.
And I tried to do that there, and I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
And the beautiful part about it is I left out, I took care of myself. That situation evolved, and Courage Center's in a really beautiful place, and I
Yeah.
still get to be a part of it in a way that's meaningful and congruent for
Yeah.
me, and which celebrates my gifts. So, such a big piece of that too is that there's so many layers to this, but it's all of that was also uncovering all the ways that I manage like my trauma management techniques. And so that was one layer of that. And it's interesting how that time in my life, I felt like I had a lot of support to fall
Mhm.
apart
Mhm.
and find ways to cobble it back together. But how that one piece I finally felt seen and understood by one key person, that is the thing that came back and just got used against me over and over and over again. And so the thing that I'm gonna cry, the thing that felt safe for me that finally helped me feel seen was the
Yeah.
thing that got used over and over and over again to like beat me up later.
Yeah.
And it's so hard because the thing I was told was that I gave up providing for the family or trying to do anything to help. And when I look back at that, my season of cocooning meant that I just also wasn't working a job 50 hours a week. I
Mhm.
was taking care of the kids all the
Mhm.
time.
Yep.
helping start a private practice in the business, doing consulting work. There were all these pieces of my life that were actually like a full-time life. I just took another full-time life off my plate.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I got to really deconstruct how my overfunctioning played into that.
Yeah. And that's, yeah, definitely a good example of that because you had multiple things going on at that time in your life. And then you got to the point where like you just had to be, you didn't really have an option other than to be true to yourself at that point. Like you were burnt out, done, and you needed, and it was multiple things in your life, right? It
Oh,
wasn't,
absolutely. I was burnt to a crisp.
oh yeah. I
I went through
was
this.
concerned. I was like, girl, are you okay? I don't think you're
Yeah.
okay. And you were true to yourself and you just entered into a different season where you were able to
Yep.
come out of it on the other side of it more true to who you really are, which
Oh,
is also
absolutely.
really cool that you can circle back around and your relationship with the Courage Center. You still do a lot of stuff in that world. You do a lot of the peer support stuff. You've got a great relationship with Courage Center. So it speaks to that. Even if something is, you feel like is your calling,
Yes.
it may not be the right now, right? It doesn't mean that it can't circle back around. It just might mean that for that moment, it's better to just take care of yourself.
Which I think is a very common thing for people who come into helping professions.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of us are wounded and we're working out our woundedness through our professional avenues. And I think that that's probably true across the board,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And in the helping professions. And then what we get to see is the differentiation between the people who have the real call to do the
Mm-hmm.
work and really deepen their process and get more healthy and centered. I mean, like, I didn't actually get my ADHD diagnosed formally until what, 2 months ago?
Yeah, girl. But we knew that for a long time. But yes,
It was so masked, though.
that is true.
If I went through evaluations or took tests, like my
Mm-hmm.
trauma management, the ways that I overfunctioned and compensated
Yeah.
and stuff, like when I actually peeled all of that back and I started literally just like living with more
Mm-hmm.
space in my nervous system, not overfunctioning in every area of my life, like that's
Mm-hmm.
when the ADHD
Yeah.
became crystal clear.
Mm-hmm.
Like crystal clear. I couldn't deny it,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. The overlap of the trauma and then, whether it's biological or environmental, neurodevelopmental, whatever that might be, when we start resolving those trauma symptoms, it is very common for the like neurodivergent symptoms to really be like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, that's
Mm-hmm.
definitely, I mean, since going into private practice, moving from a structured environment
Mm-hmm.
to anytime I go from one environment to the next, I have to create a whole nother like thing of systems
Mm-hmm.
to help me actually function. So I have to like
Mm-hmm.
figure out what's going to be the thing that's going to help me remember all the things, right,
Mm-hmm.
in a different environment. But yeah, when I went into private practice, the ADHD was definitely
Yeah.
very clearly coming out. And it's not this like, oh, I'm ADHD squirrel kind of thing, right? Like
Yeah.
it's not. This is something that significantly impacts my life on a daily basis. Scheduling clients, keeping up with details, being able to do all of these administrative tasks. Like I can do all the big stuff, but when it
Yeah.
comes down to like this daily pay the thing, do this and keep and remember the thing, like all of that, like
Yeah.
not so great at daily life. Just not working on it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Well, the details are hard to keep up with because, like, that's what feels like it's so much.
so here's the interesting thing is my brain does remember details,
Oh, for
but it
sure.
doesn't remember the details that like everybody else thinks it needs to remember. I will remember what it feels like to have a conversation with a person about this thing, and I'll remember how this impacted them, and I'll remember the somatic movement that might go with that. Like I'll remember all of that. But if you ask me what I ate for lunch, probably
Yep.
not going to remember that, right? And
Yeah.
so My brain just doesn't identify certain things as important when they are sometimes.
Just doesn't know how to prioritize them.
Yeah.
I'm terrible at remembering names and sometimes even faces. It's so funny how faces can just be blank spots for me, even with people I've done a lot of work with. But they can tell me one detail. They can say this one thing, and the cascade of their entire life story, the timeline of their story,
will come back.
Comes right into place, and it just comes right back. Which is why I'm great for people who really want to do deep work, and why I'm not great for people who really just want skills work.
Yeah.
Because I can't ignore the patterns.
Yeah.
And I don't rush.
No, people don't like it when a lot of times in session, I give a lot of space, and it does make people pretty uncomfortable, especially at first. But after a little while, it's like they start realizing what it's like to have a conversation with somebody that's not just responding to respond, but is actually engaged and attuning and is showing up in that space.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there's this part in the somatic experiencing work where we talk about like how, we do need to employ some top-down strategies, especially in the beginning, because like those are where the nervous system scaffolding is, and being able to deconstruct that and put other scaffolding in place. You can't just take the scaffolding away, right? So there is a part of it where you're like, this is what's happening. Let me draw this like nervous system scale for you and talk about threshold. But I love the getting curious piece.
Yeah, I prefer to just get curious about things than to think that I know all the answers.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think I shared with you the last week I went up and did our somatic experiencing training. And for people who are listening, it's a 3-year training process. It's very intensive. You have to do your own sessions and group and individual consultations. You have to do 3 weeks of training every year in person, where you're doing a lot of practice. And then in the last session, as the trainer said, you have to remember it's all countertransference. It's all projection. And so when we get into our practice sessions and we're in there, and they'll stop us and say, what's happening here? And we'll say, it looks like this person has this thing going on. And they'll say, well, why don't you ask them if that's what's going on? And then they ask us to reframe it and say, I have a theory. Because so much, especially if trauma work, is about the nuance of fawning and pleasing. And so what a lot of people end up doing in therapy, especially top-down strategy therapy for years, is just coming in and thinking that they're doing the work. And in some ways they are, but the work is dictated by the therapist that's giving them the structure. And so people find themselves needing the therapist to resolve their problems. And in my work, I had somebody this morning who said, had this moment where we were in the car and this thing happened and I didn't react, and I was able to observe myself not reacting, and I realized this is why we're doing the work. And they said, I have you to thank for that. And I said, let's take a minute and recontextualize that for a second. I said, I hold the container. And in those moments when you're in that conflict and you lose your compassionate witness, I'm teaching you how to be your own compassionate witness again. I can be that until you can be that for yourself. And so, like, that door opening was you learning to be your own compassionate witness. I love that framework.
Yeah.
Because I said, in your work, you know the limits of what you can do and what you can't do. You know how to communicate that. That's your own witness. But when we're in interpersonal conflict or in things that tap our trauma, and we're in that fear center that comes up and we're activated in our bodies and, all of the stuff, like, we lose the witness. And that's where we get ourselves in trouble, trying to grab onto something outside of ourselves.
Yeah, well, that's what a lot of trauma recovery actually looks like. It's not changing the thing. It's not even changing the feelings necessarily.
Or the thoughts.
It's literally, you show up more compassionately with yourself. Your perspective can shift to see it differently and expand. What's something really interesting I've been doing lately is in combination with some of that somatic work that I'm doing, where there's a lot of release, and the more of that release of the kind of that shock that can get stored, combining that with Reiki and acupuncture And so I did that this past week, and after a pretty intense somatic session, it was really interesting because the somatic stuff helps release so much, but the Reiki and the acupuncture gave me more energy. And so it's like releasing, but then getting your energy more aligned and feeling differently in my own skin in addition to the somatic stuff was just a very different experience. I'm looking forward to continuing to explore, because the interplay of those two things is really fascinating to me. We're releasing, but what are we doing to support the body in that restructuring?
Yeah. Yeah, and for some people that is using the tools. That's where tools are helpful, but using the tools for the release is where we get ourselves in trouble, right? But what you're saying is, and then we employ resources to help with the reorganization that's happening.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting with the model that I've used is that the more that I do that somatic work, as opposed to EMDR is somatic, but this one works a little bit different. And as opposed to with EMDR, it's like I'm not good enough, and we can track those results a little bit easier. With this, it's more of I find things shift on the inside. I feel different in my own skin, and then I find myself reacting differently, and I find my nervous system reacting differently. I had something happen this weekend that got me. I got real mad, pissed me off, and then it wasn't really nearly as intense. My logic brain was still actually online, which doesn't typically happen. And then I removed myself from the situation. I let the person know. That's not behavior that would just naturally come. But the more work I put in, and that releasing of the trauma allows me, it's just less intense, right?
Yeah.
Those waves become less intense, easier to navigate. I think our body's recovering.
Well, and what you get with the bottom-up strategies is tools that help you understand that the waves will come and you can trust moving through the waves. It's not the idea that the waves are just going to go away and that's how it should be, right? And so I think that that's a challenge for a lot of people, is the idea when they first come into therapy, and that can be very much reinforced by top-down approaches, is the idea that you're going to fix the problem, right? Rather than learn to hold space for and manage yourself through the problem.
And so much of it comes down to trust in ourselves, right? We think we lose trust in other people when we get hurt, but in a lot of ways, we lose trust with our own ability to navigate those relationships, to see it.
Lose that compassionate witness for ourselves. Yeah.
If we never have anybody teach us how to regulate our emotions, they're going to be overwhelming, typically. And so if we don't have that, then it just can be really difficult.
And then there's the layer for a lot of us too. We're not taught to regulate our own emotions, and we take on the responsibility of feeling it's our job to regulate other people's emotions. And a lot of times for me, that's the cascade. Even for years of taking care of my own self and having clarity, I'd have these, what I call energy leaks, right? I'd be really resolute about a boundary, and then I'd get in the moment, and then somebody else would get dysregulated, and the energy leak would go to that, which is my discomfort. It's not theirs. Ultimately, stopping that helped me learn to sit with my own discomfort.
Yeah. And the more that I do this, the more that I'm learning that it's so much more about trusting your ability to hold those feelings. We have that tolerance piece where we'll get there and we're out of our window. But as that window grows, we gain more confidence in our ability to hold the hard feelings and to hold the big things.
Or even to hold ourselves if we go outside of our window of tolerance too, understanding we'll come back into it.
Yeah.
I mean, sorry, I interrupted you.
I think my computer's going to die soon.
I want to just say one last piece, because I think this is what shows up in the nuances of our relationships, our close relationships. We've been talking about this from a professional perspective, and part of the reason why you and I have stayed intuitively in friendship. We joke and say, you're one of my soul contracts. And so it's this part too where think we both have this wide space of trusting ourselves, even in opposition of what everybody says we should be saying, doing, feeling, acting, right? Because of feeling so misunderstood or not like we fit in a place. And then when you come into it and you realize it's yours to give to yourself, it's yours to hold for yourself. It's my job to hold my trauma, my job to soothe my inner children, my job to expand and to regulate myself when things outside of me are distressing. Doesn't mean I don't mess it up. It's all flow and learning. But one of the things I've always had an intuitive draw to is this kind of catch-22 of friendships where I'm able to intuitively find space where we can just be. I can be fully myself. I can be fully myself. You can be fully yourself.
Yeah.
All the messy, crazy, wild, funny, zany, whatever you want to call it. And then as I've done my work and you've done your work, it's funny. Like every once in a while, one of us will fall into the advice giving, like wanting to jump in. And we'll be like, oh. And I've done it recently. I said, I just realized I was jumping in and trying to save you. Like, but there's a beauty of being able to just sit with somebody as they wrestle with their stuff and mirroring it, offering attunement, validation where needed, and maybe even some hard stuff. I think that's the part is that people feel like when you're not jumping in and giving somebody the truth, that you're not offering accountability.
Yeah.
And I would say that there's a lot of accountability with you and I.
Yeah, and that's grown over the years. I think one of the things that, I don't know, just being able to just really be yourself and understanding that the other person gets it and that there's just this huge space to just exist. I know that if I talk to you on the phone when you are driving, you're going to be all over the place, and that's normal. I just know that. You're going to be like, that's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's fine, right? It's fine. But just having more space just to be ourselves. And if I know we both go through different times where we don't have a whole lot of energy or a whole lot to give, and that's okay. And I think that one of the differences, which I don't really know for sure, but with neurodivergent friendships versus neurotypical friendships is that there's more continuity from day to day, I guess. But I can just pick back up with my friends that are neurodivergent, spicy, just a lot more freedom just to be yourself. I actually read something interesting lately that was talking about autism and neurodivergence, and it was talking about how neurodivergent people have friendships and just as much like a quality of friendships, but they're with other neurodivergent people. And it's the same with neurotypical people. And so the people that I work with in my practice that are neurodivergent, I highly encourage them to kind of keep an eye out for other people that might be like them, because there's something about having a different way you operate and think and having somebody get that and understand is just huge.
Yeah, it's the difference between, okay, so I'll use the example of online dating. I just made a commitment to sign up for a month, and let's just say it's been interesting. But I do have moments where I get my feelings hurt or I don't understand, where I connect with like 10 people and I feel like I'm having these decent conversations and then people just fall off or they disappear. And there's an instinct to say what's wrong with me. And the compassionate witness part of me gets a little lost. And being able to share that with a friend who just can hold space and be reflective or just listen, or the person who's like, well, maybe, I mean, like, it sounds like you're just trying too hard, or it sounds like you should be doing this, or maybe you're expecting too much too early, or maybe you're too much. And I'm like, I've done that all my life. So the shift in thinking for me with this isn't to adopt that perspective. Maybe if I just change something about myself, everything else that causes me discomfort will go away. No, actually, the more I change myself, the more discomfort comes.
Yeah.
Because I'm not showing myself my own witness. So what happens with somebody who can just give me space, right? Just give me space, is that I find my witness again, naturally.
Yeah.
It's like with clients who are suicidal, if you just have them talk about like the nuance and detail of their experience, 99% of the time they argue for their own resilience. You don't have to do anything. People feel like there's such a sense of responsibility, but most of the time people are actually, they're able to like come up with their own arguments. You don't even have to do the work. That's the compassionate witness, that I trust that you have the capacity, and that's where it's projection, what I've learned with my friends, family, other people who want to jump in and solve it for me is like, that's their discomfort. It's something that my process is tapping for them. It's not that they don't trust me. There's that thing that mirrors it for them, and they don't trust themselves in that situation. And they're giving me the advice that they would take, and it's a reflection of them.
Yeah, I have a great example of this. People are super uncomfortable with other people's feelings, that discomfort piece. Several years ago, we were on a cruise and we had a family death. Came back.
Yeah.
We were at the kind of visitation thing, and I had one of the people that were there come up to me and be like, "Oh, well, how was your cruise?" I'm like, "It sucked, actually. I was stuck on a cruise after somebody died. That was not cool. Oh, but it was really pretty, wasn't it? Oh, but like they just couldn't stop, right? They needed it to be okay. They needed that cruise to be a good experience for me because they needed that, right? And so that's just always kind of stood out to me. You were actually there that night when that happened, and that just has always stood out to me. And I try to help my clients understand that most people are very uncomfortable with their own emotions, which means they're uncomfortable with other people's emotions. It can only take somebody as far as I have gone. So if I'm not comfortable sitting with my own feelings, then how am I going to be able to sit with you in your discomfort without needing to fix it?
Yeah, needing to fix it. Yeah, and that's part also where people are uncomfortable with directness. Because I'm clearly defining who and what I am in that situation. And a lot of people want sovereignty and autonomy up until they get it. Right?
Yeah.
Then they feel lost. And that's why a lot of people find themselves with top-down therapists who want to just offer them so many theories and or actually offer them answers. I recently had somebody call me and say, I think my problem is my attachments. How can we talk about it next time we come in? And I said, yeah. And they came in and they start talking and they speed up and they speed up and they speed up and they speed up and they speed up. And I just listen until there's this like one part. And maybe we'll stop and go, let's pause. Let's just pause right there. What does that mean? Well, no. Come back to this one part just for a second. And it can be a thought, it can be a sensation, it could be an image that's in your mind, it could be a story you tell yourself. Like, well, let's come back to that one thing and sit with it for a second. And it's like, but I want to tell you about this cognitive structure and this understanding I brought to discomfort. We got to be able to sit with that discomfort, even if for 30 seconds, because if we can do it for 30 seconds and then we start to do it for a minute. And that's the piece that for me, I was in top-down therapy and I was a top-down therapist for a long time because that provided a lot of safety. It was a safety structure, and deconstructing that to the point. I wrote a thing the other day about tears. The tears came today and everybody's like, hugs, I'm sorry. I'm like, why are you sorry? I hope everything's okay. Like, absolutely everything's okay. Do you know what's happening? I'm like, no, that's the whole point. Like, I moved to the point where I don't have to. I actually trust that if the tears come, my body has something it needs to release, and I just let it release it and I move on.
And we don't have to make meaning out of it.
That's the part. Yeah. And I still will go to meaning when I'm in something that touches a real deep or big, like intense emotion. But I understand that about myself.
Yeah.
And then my person that I do my somatic work with says, oh, let's pause right there. And I'm like, but I don't, let me talk. Let me talk. Yeah.
I don't want to be in my body. What body?
Yeah. Well, and I laugh because that's the other thing. Like, we learn, how do we intellectualize our emotions? I had somebody the other day who was like, I feel. And I'm like, anytime you say I feel before an emotion, you're in the intellectual process. What does it look like? How's it different for you to say I am sad versus I feel sad? And then immediately the thing comes and I'll go, let's just sit with that just for a minute. And then we can go back to talking about the feeling. But let's actually be with the feeling for a minute. So yeah. I mean, we could go on and on and on. So I'll stop us here. But like, I love that. And so I think one of the things I love about us is our journey has been an intuitive one of just showing up and just being our unadulterated selves.
Yeah. There's something about just having the freedom. Like, I can send you anything via text, and I know that I don't have to worry about how it comes off. I don't have to think through, oh, well, maybe this might be offensive or whatever. Like, I'll just send you whatever crazy stuff and then it's fine. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I was gonna say that's another funny thing about online dating is that like I'm a curious person. So like if you say something and I don't understand what you mean,
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask. And it's so funny to me how many people find offense to that. And it's not the offense to the fact that I'm seeking to understand, it's that the assumption that I should understand. And how
Yeah.
they treat me like I'm a fucking idiot because I don't understand what they mean. And so
Yeah.
I'll say things. The other day, somebody was talking about having a dream. His intro was like having a dream to own 20 to 100 acres. And, da, 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 da. And I was like, oh, sweet. And I'm from this part of the country. I've been here for a little bit of time. And I was just trying to be conversational, said, so they sent me a connect request, right? I didn't come out of the blue with them. I said, so is like actually being in the South part of the dream. Like, and they're like, well, I'm fucking living in South Carolina, aren't I? And I was like, yes, and that could mean a lot of different things. And I didn't come back in an ugly way. I just wrote back and said, yes, you are. And
And
like, I don't
is it
know
part of the
how,
dream? I still don't know. You didn't answer.
yeah, yeah, and so it's this part where it's like, okay. And so I unmatched, but it was because I don't want anybody who's coming at me like that. Or people make assumptions about what you mean by things you say all the time, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
instead of saying, hey, can you help me understand what that means for you? Because I know what that means for me, but I don't want to assume. It's so funny how many people are uncomfortable because
Mhm.
they just go through the world thinking that people should just understand them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
People
Okay. But
also
that's a
want you
whole,
to read their minds. But we
yeah.
can go on that a long time.
Well, and there's that discomfort because then I can project that onto you and then I can be chronically misunderstood, which is also something that,
Yes.
I've had to contend with myself
Yeah.
personally.
We should
Mm-hmm.
do a talk on.
Oh, you froze up. You there? All right, everybody. Casie had warned me that her computer might go dead. So it looks like her computer went dead. So the second time in recent weeks that we have an abrupt ending, but a timely ending. So I appreciate everybody being with us today for this episode of Hashtag Love Her Podcast. And we'll be back next week with another episode. Thank you for being with us, and we'll catch up with you soon. Bye.